we will dive deep into the world of socio-technical systems, from British coal all the way to serverless platforms. So yeah, I got my notebook out, and without further ado, Andrew, please take it away.
Amsterdam, am I on? Can you hear me? There we go. How's Amsterdam doing? Y'all ready for this? All right, buckle up. So learning socio-technical systems the hard way. Does anyone use this term, socio-technical? I started hearing people say it a lot. And then you ask most people what it actually means or where it came from, and they don't know. But they like to say it right now. Yeah. He blames me. Patrick blames me. So this is also the long history of socio-technical progress. There's a few steps forward and a few steps sideways, so just be warned. Prologue. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And I think that summarizes a lot of DevOps conversations. That's a famous quote by this guy, H.L. Mencken. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. She said I don't need an introduction, but I like to frame a bit of my story so you kind of have context for why I think the way I do. So my background, really kind of the confluence of cloud, open source, and agile practices. I worked on a bunch of open source projects. I was involved in Puppet very early, going back to 2004. I was a VP of engineering at an OpenStack startup that was eventually sold to EMC. Spent 5 years at Pivotal doing Cloud Foundry and Spring projects, and then spent 3 years at Red Hat doing OpenShift type stuff. So there's like a bunch of automation, a bunch of platforming stuff, and then in parallel to that, wrote some books, worked on DevOps days, worked on Velocity Conference, and had some fun. And people blame me for stuff all the time, so. And then I just started a new adventure with some friends. Ergonautics, our new adventure. This is me at the peak pandemic beard. It's so great to be out and about again. Thank you for inviting me to Amsterdam. I live in the middle of the desert. That's my Twitter handle. This is a picture from Ghent, so thanks for the Ghent people. And this is various configurations of hair and beard. In case you see me somewhere else, I might look very different. Don't be afraid. It's the same monster. So moving on, that's enough of that. I invented DevOps. So we're going to go from silly to sillier. This is embarrassing. Sometimes silly people introduce me and say things like, I invented DevOps. I don't think anyone invented DevOps because there is no root cause. I didn't invent DevOps, certainly. I stole it. Stole it from my friends. You want to come up? You're invited. So this is like the most actionable advice in the whole presentation. Good DevOps copy, great DevOps steal. So wherever you find good ideas, you should steal them. By the end of this, I'm stealing stuff from the Dutch, by the way, just so you know. So you're be warned. So for a while, people were arguing about, oh, we need a better definition of DevOps. If we just had a better definition, then it would make everything clear and we'd do it. And this is my little pithy version I came up with a few years ago. So I've been using this kind of slide for a while. It's optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software with software and with humans. And really, this is an extension of the argument that software is eating the world. So software is going to eat software is going to eat operations, software is going to eat security, software is going to eat everything. That's what we're doing. But also humans. That's the socio and the technical part. Okay, but what should we do now? Like, what's your advice? What should you do? It depends, because you don't all work at the same place. You don't have the same preconditions. You don't have the same winning conditions. You have a bunch of things that are variables. So if you try to copy other people, which is another thing we're going to come back to, might not work very well. We don't know what to do because DevOps isn't prescriptive. We can't do SRE by the book because we aren't Google. Like, okay. Full buzzword compliance. With software and with humans. A lot of people like to make things sound like it's super easy. It's all rainbows and unicorns. Mostly, I feel like DevOps was like the Vikings covered with blood and mud, but that's another conversation. We're gonna get to the good part. So my personal journey and what became a lot of the DevOps conversation was deeply influenced by Deming. So I read a lot of Deming early days. I was kind of like soaking in Agile, and then I started reading Deming. I was like, wow, this guy figured it out, or he has like some clues. So this is something Deming wrote probably 40, 50 years ago. One gets a good rating for fighting a fire. The result is visible, can be quantified. If you do it right the first time, you are invisible. You satisfy the requirements, that is your job. Mess it up and correct it later, you become a hero. That sounds like today, right? In a lot of places. So during the Second World War, Deming worked as a quality expert in armament plants throughout the United States. So he has this statistical process control, and he's like running around optimizing all this stuff. And this approach helped them produce higher quality products while raising productivity and decreasing costs. True story. Deming approached everything as an opportunity to improve the system. So it's a system approach. So it's not optimizing any one task, it's optimizing the flow through the system. And then the war ended. And Deming had all this data, but no one listened to him. And the soldiers came back, and they said that was fine when the women are doing the work in the factory, but we're going to go back to command and control. Thank you very much. So in the US, no one would listen to Deming, and that might have been the end of the story, but we'll come back to that. So meanwhile, in the 50s, in British coal mines, this is where the term socio-technical actually comes from. Trist and the Tavistock Institute are doing research on automation in coal mines. And what they discover in the Hamar vein is an alternative. And I won't read all these things, and there's a bunch of these kind of clips here. But cooperation between task groups was everywhere in evidence. Personal commitment was obvious. Absenteeism was low. Accidents infrequent, and productivity high. And then in contrast, you have this kind of, what's happening is this attempt to automate coal mining with what's called longwall. And the longwall process is very, very machine intensive and very, very big. And so you work in what's essentially 8-hour shifts around the clock, and each shift has its own task. And there's very little communication or coordination between the tasks. So one group moves the conveyor belt to the wall, it shears off a bunch of coal, another group comes, loads the thing, and it goes through this cycle with this shift, each one having really no context or communication with the next one, versus the short wall, which is the Hamar mine, which is, for all intents and purposes, we'll call it continuously delivered microservices. So they like have these small autonomous teams that are working on the coal face. So the longwall mining, each shift works with a single task. One shift would be tasked with moving the conveyor belts, unloading the other coal, and on and on. This is what I said. No one saw the whole process, only their individual part of it. And on paper, the longwall mining system should be much more productive than the shortwall system, but in reality, that expected productivity never happened. So there's a massive investment in this automation, and the productivity doesn't show up. In fact, morale is lower and safety is worse too. So socio-technical systems theory comes out of Trist studying this phenomena, and the kind of takeaway of socio-technical system theory is this statement that the quality of any organizational system can only be understood and improved if social and technical are both considered as interdependent parts of a single system. So here's some principles. This is all from the paper. So what I did before is I read all these papers from Trist from the 50s up through about the 70s and 80s. And then there's a surprise twist that I just basically discovered in the last day since I got to Amsterdam. So we'll get to that in a minute. So these are the principles from the short wall innovation that happened to the Hamar mine, that the work system, which comprised of a set of activities that made up a functioning whole, now became the basic unit rather than the single jobs into which it was decomposable. Right, so you have these autonomous cross-functional teams that are digging through the mine. Correspondingly, the worker became central rather than the individual job holder. Internal regulation of the system by the group was thus rendered possible rather than the external regulation of individuals by supervisors. A design principle based on the redundancy of functions rather than the redundancy of parts characterized the underlying organizational philosophy, which tended to develop multiple skills in the individual and immensely increased the response repertoire of the group. Like, this sounds very similar to what we see in a lot of our work, right? This principle valued the discretionary rather than the prescribed part of the work roles. I have a bet that every single organization you work in, every single organization ever, is held together by conscientious people who are willing to do things that aren't their job. And if everyone only does their job, then everything will fall apart. It treated the individual as complementary to the machine rather than an extension of it. It was variety increasing for both the individual and the organization rather than variety decreasing in the bureaucratic mode. So here's this new paradigm and versus the old paradigm. I'm not going to read all this, but the new paradigm is the joint optimization of the social and technical, managed complementary, optimum task grouping, and multiple broad skills instead of the maximum task breakdown and simple narrow skills. Internal controls, flat organization, and then we'll just get to the bottom, commitment and innovation. So this is this new paradigm from the 50s. So increased productivity, higher morale, and better safety. Sounds good, right? Everyone wants that? Who wouldn't want that? Guess what happens? The divisional board did not want attention drawn to this. And then the bottom says, they were intent on intensifying managerial controls in order to accelerate the full mechanization of the mines. And within a year or two, the conventional system reinstated itself. And at the bottom, it says, the union regionally negotiated special pay for the operators of the new equipment. This broke up the unity of the face groups, which were further decimated when bonuses were introduced for various classes of workers. Within a year or two, the conventional system reinstated itself. Granting more autonomy was not popular. Awesome. Super awesome. And then what happens is there's this transition in the energy markets from coal to oil, and they don't want to encourage anything new because the greater use of oil is basically making the shift, and coal's getting phased out anyway, and so they're like, that's for coal mining, and everyone forgets about it. But from the research, this is also important, and I've witnessed this in some of our kind of like experiments. Autonomous groups do not always succeed, lack of support in the organization, right? So if you don't have executive support for a new way of working, you're not going to be successful with the new way of working. And the innovations were not likely to survive unless the organization as a whole changed to accommodate that innovation. Who has this going on anywhere? Seen that before? Yeah, it's awesome. This is a quote from one of my friends. You're just talking to him. This is a key metric for your DevOps transformation, the mean time to leadership change. And the only reason we know of Deming now is because he went to Japan. So he goes to Japan, and there's this thing that comes out in the 80s, so it's like 30 years after he goes to Japan, and at that point, the Japanese auto industry is beating the Americans, and this is from the interview. I think the people here expect miracles. American management thinks that they can just copy from Japan, but they don't know what to copy. So copy from Japan, copy from Netflix, copy from Google. They don't know what to copy. So no Deming, no Toyota, no Lean, no DevOps. So American executives visited the Japanese factories, and they thought the Japanese were hiding the truth from them. They couldn't conceive of this just-in-time delivery, this continuously delivered microservice thing. What they were doing was hiding because where's the inventory? They just, like the Americans couldn't conceive of it. And they believe they're just like being put on, like they're hiding something somewhere. So GM goes back and tries to mechanize its factories from what it saw in Japan. And I'll just skip to the middle and the bottom here. So the company shelled out an eye-popping $45 billion in capital investment. So this is in the 80s and early 90s. Despite that spending, its global market share rose by about a single percentage point to 22%. For the same amount of money, we could have bought Toyota and Nissan outright, which would have instantly bumped GM's market share to 40%. Efficient. Quality suffered because instead of making flawless cars, workers simply did their assigned jobs. Workers had no big picture goal of building cars together to motivate them. So everyone's doing their task, but it's not really working because no one sees the big picture. Focusing on the technical without accounting for the socio never goes very well. All you do is automate the confusion. So how could I make this more Dutch? So I went down a rabbit hole because I read all these papers up to like the 80s, and then I was like, naive Google search, socio-technical systems, Netherlands, what's a good example? And what I found was pretty crazy, and I already have like a bunch of notes about stuff I wanted to change and do from these experiments from what is referred to as lowland socio-technical system design that was worked on from the 1970s up until the 2000s by this guy, Ulbo, who I probably pronounced wrong. It's also sometimes referred to as modern socio-technical systems. And they did a lot of very interesting work that I have not quote fully digested, but if someone doesn't give this talk here next year, I volunteer to come back and like break this down for us. So I asked ChatGPT to summarize the difference between lowland socio-technical system design and the normal socio-technical system design, or the original socio-technical system design. So lowland socio-technical system design distinguishes itself from the socio-technical system approach by placing a stronger emphasis on co-design, contextual sensitivity, social justice, flexibility, adaptability, and the integration of ethical considerations. By incorporating these distinctions, lowland socio-technical system design aims to create socio-technical systems that are more inclusive, responsive, and aligned with the needs and values of the users and society as a whole. I was like, damn, that's like the most Dutch thing ever. And then it goes on, and I'm serious, like I was reading this stuff for hours yesterday, and I really, really think there's a deep vein of some fun stuff to play with here, going back to the 70s. Up to the 2000s. So according to DeSitter, any organizational design should start from the point of reducing the structural complexity and increasing the flow capabilities. Organizations must transition to the state of having a simple structure with complex jobs to be able to deal with uncertainty, complexity, and environmental changes. So instead of having this kind of maximum task breakdown, what DeSitter is advocating is simple org structures and complex capabilities inside of those flows. And optimizing flow is the work of smoothing the boundaries between the tasks and the teams. And that comes to structure, which he mentioned very explicitly. I'm going to say tooling, because this is the technical part. And then I think narratives are also important. And you see this in the narrative from the Haymore mine. So the optimization results from productive conflict. So everyone has social interests, and selfish interests rather, and you need to get them to align in favor of collective interests. So you need this ongoing negotiation to establish the common ground and enable the emergence of these shared practices around the boundary objects. And the boundary objects could be Kubernetes or Terraform or whatever. So is this my DevOps? I think I always cringe when people are like, DevOps just means everyone does everything. It's like, don't do that. It doesn't work. Everyone should not undertake every task. Everyone should understand the value that others' work contributes. The socio builds on collective narratives. Everyone wants to be the hero in the story. There's a tendency to attach our identity to our task, right? And in a lot of cases, certainly my last name is a reference to something one of my ancestors did for work. And when tasks change, the identities can feel erased. So a lot of resistance you see in some of this is like, you come in with this new story, this new task is going to change, and then people feel like, oh, you're erasing who I am. I've done this for so long, right? And this is I'm going to read this. I'm stealing this from my co-founder, Jabe, and this relates to some of his research. But I think it's really interesting and kind of reflects on some of the stuff from the lowland socio-technical stuff. So when individuals are unable to locate themselves in the dominant narratives, they're required to understand and reproduce. So you have like your values of your company on the wall, and everyone's supposed to like know how to talk about that. And like, here's our thing. When they don't locate themselves in that narrative, they're disadvantaged by not being able to use that narrative to make sense of their lived experience, right? So it's like you don't know why you're doing your work. You don't know why you're part of this story. When individual narratives are mistrusted or excluded from the discourse, marginalized people are disadvantaged in their contribution of theories, knowledge, and narratives to the social world they participate in, but are not recognized by. Right? So a lot of organizations went through this thing where they're like erasing the sysadmins. Even though we say system like every other word in every other talk, it's like the system administrators. Whew. Oh, and then my favorite holiday every year for the last few years is the death of DevOps. I don't know what just happened. Somehow I killed it, finally. So this is from this writer, Miranda Fricker. Hermeneutical injustice is this problem of locating oneself in the narrative, and when a gap in collective interpretive resources puts someone at an unfair disadvantage when it comes to making sense of their social experiences. So I kind of added some of this because of the way that the lowland socio-technical systems was framing this notion of justice, and I really like some of this. And you see this resistance in a lot of organizations where people are told you got to do this new thing, but they don't understand where they fit in this story. So these hermeneutical injustices occur when there's gaps in the tools of social interpretation, and it's putting someone at an unfair cognitive disadvantage. And it prevents making sense of their experience and when their interest is strongly aligned with understanding it. Like you need them or want them, and it's better for them to understand, but they can't place themselves in the narrative. So if this was easy, everyone would be good at it by now, right? Everyone would be good at DevOps. We've been doing it we're coming up on 15 years. Everyone, well, yeah, go back to Trist, right? I mean, that's the other thing about some of this reading is like, they figured it out, and then it's like the autocrats come, wipe it all away. So everyone wants DevOps. Who wants DevOps? Anyone? Yay, who wants DevOps? Here's what you actually want. Here's what most organizations really want. It's all the ilities: reliability, availability, scalability, operability, usability, observability, throw some more ilities, throw the security, all this, all for free, without changing anything. That's what most people are looking for. And yesterday, by the way. So just to make that point, I like to make the text get big. That's where a lot of people live. For free. And then the other thing you have to deal with trying to make these socio-technical things is that performance almost always goes down before it goes back up. So you gotta be wary of this J curve of change is hard. And it's very easy to make this demonstration with the individual skills if you're trying to get better at chess, trying to get better at playing music, golf swing, basketball, whatever sport you wanna play. But organizations often use this against a change initiative. And if you don't get back to if you don't have the sponsorship to go through that and get back to their side, then you probably won't be very successful. And there'll be no long-term benefit, maybe even punishment. And then another thing that used to drive me crazy is this tendency for organizations to just kind of change the words, and like they'll say, oh, we're adopting SRE, or we're adopting DevOps, or adopting Agile, and it's like, well, how come you're not good at any of this? Because you didn't change anything. Like all you did was like change the sysadmins to SRE titles. And if you go to the literature, then what you find in this process is that in the early adopters and the innovators, their motivation is to get an advantage. And so they get one. And then it gets the DORA metrics, or it gets some other thing that's legitimized because they're winning some game. And then what you see as it comes into the rest of the adoption is this notion of seeking legitimacy. So they don't actually care about getting advantage more, because they're not going to die. There's like these Walking Dead enterprises, and it's like we just need to like use the right words, so we're like the cool kids. And what I came to reflect on when I was thinking about this is part of this is they can't find themselves in the narrative. They don't understand how to, like they hear the words and they want to use the right words, but they don't understand how to transition from where they are into that new narrative in a way that actually helps them take the new behaviors. So the words cross this chasm before the understanding and the practice. So this is my insightful takeaways, coming to the end. Autonomous teams outperform command and control, but only when supported. Joint optimization with the socio maximizes the value of the technical. Everyone doesn't need to do everyone else's job. They just need to value the interdependence of the jobs. And then last but not least, the Dutch already have some untapped ideas about this that I'm gonna go read. That's my homework. So we can't just copy because we don't know what to copy, right? If we see someone on the stage and they say all this stuff they did, usually, first of all, they're lying because they're giving you like the most positive version of what's actually happened. And I'll summarize it. I think this is the French language. Everything is a shit show on the inside. So this is there we go. This is a hard problem. It was hard for Deming, who had all the data, and it was hard for Trist, who had all the data. So change is hard. I just think this picture's funny. A bad system will beat a good person every time. It is not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. That's my requisite Deming quote to add again. So some parting thoughts. This is hard. It isn't a technical problem. And it isn't a people problem. So when people just say culture, 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 I don't think that solves it either. You have to solve both together. Don't give up. Demi didn't give up. Optimizing the human experience and performance of operating software with software and humans. Sometimes I talk like this, software, 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 software. Sometimes I talk like this, humans, 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 humans. But it's really about both together, optimizing both together. And I frame this as a talk about learning. And I said this many times in other talks. Learning is the only sustainable advantage. And you haven't learned anything until you change your behavior. Collecting trivia is not the same thing as learning. You have to get the new behavior if you want to see the new performance. There is no easy way. And that's the end. Thank you. So that's a link to our YouTube channel where we talk about all this kind of stuff all the time. And then what you say what? I can, but I think we're close to the time. I was trying to get maybe a question or two? Sure.
Yeah, I think so. We still have 5 minutes for the next talk. Do we have any questions on Slido? No. I did see a question earlier that was asking whether you actually said that software will eat humans. Is that
software
what you said?
Software is going to eat everything. That's what Mark Andreessen said, right? And VCs are right about everything all the time. So.
Oh yes, he's a rich white billionaire. We should definitely listen to him. All right.
Yeah, Wikipedia. Did my mic work? Oh, there we go. Yeah. No, I mean, I think I make jokes about like, oh, software. Like software all of a sudden got hungry. I don't think software is eating the world so much as like, it's actually the interconnectedness, the networking, all this stuff together that enables any of these things to be interesting. It's the fact that we have a supercomputer in our pocket that we walk around with. This is more powerful than every computer on the planet when I was born, right? And we all carry these in our pockets. And some of them probably have a better phone than this. This is like 2 generations back.
All right.
So it's that, and then also humans. I like humans. them. I'm a fan of humans.
And software. All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Huge applause.
Thank you, Amsterdam.